My scandal seekers, lean closer and hush your breath, for Chapter 3 delivers a banquet of whispers, shadows, and dangerous promises. Within Hawksmere's crumbling walls, poor Bess lies pale and fading, while Lady Alianor grinds feverfew with trembling hands. But let us not be fooled, dears. Those herbs are no innocent hedgerow simples. No, they were flung at her feet by none other than the Thorn, given in contempt yet working a miracle upon her maid. Gratitude, my loves, is a perilous seed, for once planted, it entwines itself around the heart. And just as hope dares to flicker in that smoky chamber, who strides in unbidden? Sir Roland, broad-shouldered, smooth of tongue, and dripping menace beneath every courteous phrase. He offers a gilded cage dressed as salvation, promising marriage, security, and comfort, yet tightening invisible chains with every word. But hush, I shall not give away the rest. Secrets will be carved in the hollow, gifts will appear where none should, and Alianor's heart will tremble between ruin and revelation. Draw close, dears, and let us begin. Chapter 3, The Carving and the Cross.
Chapter 3, The Carving and the Cross. The rhythmic scrape of the pestle against the rough stone mortar was the only sound besides Bess's shallow, rasping breaths and the weak sputter of the fire. Alianor ground the dried yellow feverfew flowers with fierce concentration, each circular motion releasing a sharp, clean scent that battled valiantly against the stale air of sickness, damp stone, and lingering wood smoke in the cramped chamber. The pungent aroma was a welcome assault, a tangible sign of action, of defiance against the creeping despair. The herbs, the precious stolen treasure Thorn had thrown contemptuously at her feet, lay carefully spread on a clean linen cloth beside Bess's pallet. Feverfew for the fever and ache, the knobby elecampane root for the deep lung congestion, dried colt's foot leaves to soothe the ragged cough, and a small, intensely pungent bundle of thyme. They felt illicit, heavy with the oppressive atmosphere of the forbidden hollow and the memory of the Thorn's silent, hostile gaze that had followed her retreat. "Easy now, Bess," Alianor murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears, and a fragile, desperate hope that felt perilously thin. She mixed the freshly powdered feverfew with a dollop of precious honey in a small wooden bowl, stirring it into a thick paste. Bess lay propped on thin, lumpy pillows, her eyes closed, her face still unnervingly ashen beneath a sheen of fever sweat. Yet, the terrifying, tearing coughs that had seemed to shake her very bones had lessened in frequency and violence since the first bitter draught of elecampane infusion hours ago. Her breathing, though still shallow and punctuated by a wet rattle deep in her chest, no longer sounded like she was drowning on dry land with every gasp. The Thorn's remedy, delivered with such brutal dismissal, was undeniably working. It was a miracle laced with thorns. Bess managed a weak cough, less violent than before, a mere echo of the convulsions that had racked her. Alianor stopped grinding, setting the pestle aside. The sudden silence felt heavy. "Here, sweetheart," Alianor said softly, lifting a small spoonful of the honeyed paste to Bess's cracked lips. The maid's eyes fluttered open, hazy with fever but startlingly aware, focusing on Alianor's face. She managed a weak swallow, grimacing slightly at the bitterness beneath the sweetness. "That's it. This will help ease the ache in your head and bones." "'Tis better, milady," Bess whispered, her voice a threadbare rasp, barely audible over the fire's crackle. She was a ghost of her robust self, diminished and fragile, but undeniably present. Truly, the burning inside? Less. She shifted feebly, her hand trembling as it sought Alianor's. The simple, cold touch, the feeble squeeze of her fingers, loosened the knot of visceral dread that had clenched Alianor's stomach since the moment she had stepped back into Hawksmere after the funeral. It was a sliver of light, fragile but real, piercing the suffocating gloom that permeated the decaying keep. The fragile piece shattered like dropped glass. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed with unnerving clarity on the flagstones of the passage outside the chamber door. Not the quick, light step of a servant, nor the shuffling gait of old Nan. These footsteps were measured, heavy with an inherent authority, the confident stride of ownership. And they were heading directly towards her door. Roland, panic, cold and sharp as the dagger hidden beneath her skirts, lanced through Alianor, freezing her for a crucial second. The herbs, they lay exposed on the linen cloth, undeniable evidence of her journey to the Forbidden Hollow. Evidence Sister Marjorie's pious whispers might have already planted in Roland's mind, but evidence he could now see with his own predatory eyes. With a frantic sweep of her arm, Alianor bundled the precious herbs back into their oiled leather wrapping, the dried leaves crackling in protest. She thrust the bundle deep beneath the lumpy straw of Bess's pallet, out of immediate sight. She snatched up the mortar and bowl, wiping feverfew dust from her fingers onto her already stained apron, just as the door latch lifted, without the courtesy of a knock. The iron mechanism clicked with finality. Sir Roland de Mowbray filled the low, arched doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the meager gray light filtering from the passage behind him. He wore dark riding leathers, damp from the persistent drizzle outside, smelling strongly of hoarse, cold earth and a faint, expensive oil. His dark eyes, sharp as flint, swept the small, humble chamber in one swift, comprehensive glance. They lingered for a fraction too long on Alianor's flushed face, noting the smudge of ash on her cheek, the disarray of her braid, then moved with cold assessment to Bess's frail form on the pallet. A flicker of something, profound distaste perhaps, or impatient dismissal, crossed his patrician features before settling into an expression of practiced, shallow concern. "Lady Alianor," he said, his voice smooth as poured honey, yet cutting through the intimate sense of herbs and sickness like a blade. "I was informed your maid was gravely ill. A pity." He didn't step fully into the room, remaining framed in the doorway, as if wary of contamination by the servants' quarters and the aura of illness. His gaze returned to Alianor, sharp and intensely assessing, stripping away her exhaustion and worry to see only vulnerability. "You look weary beyond measure. This burden is too much for you, alone. Managing a failing household, playing nurse in these quarters, it is not fitting for a woman of your station." His gesture encompassed the cramped stone-walled space, the meager fire, Bess's suffering form. Alianor straightened her spine, forcing her trembling hands to still by clutching the mortar tightly. She met his gaze, summoning every shred of composure she possessed, dredging up the haughty mask she'd worn for Godfrey. "Bess is family, Sir Roland. Her care is my duty and my choice." She gestured towards the mortar she held, a shield and an explanation. "Old Nan's remedies offer some small comfort. Thanks be." Roland's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He took a single, deliberate step into the room, his presence suddenly oppressive in the confined space, shrinking it further. His gaze flicked to the mortar, then back to her face, a predator sensing evasion. "Indeed? Nan's knowledge is rustic, folk charms, mostly." He took another step, his polished boot heel scraping on the stone floor. "One might wonder where she acquired such specific, effective herbs. Feverfew?" He tilted his head slightly. "Elecampane?" He raised one dark eyebrow, the question hanging in the air between them like a poised executioner's axe. "These are not common hedgerow finds, gathered by the kitchen door. They favor deep woods, wild places, places ill-suited and perilous for a lady to venture alone." His gaze intensified, probing, seeking a crack in her facade. The accusation was clear, wrapped in false concern. Bess shifted weakly on the pallet, a faint moan escaping her lips, drawing Roland's dismissive glance before his eyes snapped back to Alianor. Alianor's heart hammered against her ribs like a frantic prisoner. He knew, or he suspected enough to be dangerous. Marjorie's poison had found fertile ground. She kept her voice level, a monumental feat of will against the tide of fear. Nan has her ways, Sir Roland. She knows the hidden corners of the domain, has gathered simples for years. It was a weak, transparent deflection, and the slight, cold smile that touched Roland's lips confirmed he saw right through it. He didn't press the point immediately. Instead, he changed tack, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur that felt infinitely more dangerous than his open accusation. He took another step closer, invading the space near the small hearth. Alianor could smell the cloves on his breath now, a cloying sweetness, masking something colder beneath. This struggle, this daily erosion of your spirit and strength, it need not be Alianor. He used her given name deliberately, possessively, a claim staked. Hawksmere weakens by the hour, crumbling under neglect and ill fortune. Lord Edmund. He flicked a dismissive glance towards the main hall. Drifts further into the fog of age each day, a useless relic. Winter approaches like a siege engine. Without strong protection, without decisive leadership, this place will not merely crumble, it will be scavenged. And you, my dear, his gaze locked onto hers, you will be crushed beneath its fall. He took the final step, closing the distance. Alianor could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the damp wool of his cloak, see the calculating intelligence in his dark eyes. She instinctively pressed back, her shoulders meeting the unyielding cold of the stone wall. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently brush a stray lock of hair that had escaped her braid and clung damply to her temple. The gesture was intimate, presumptuous, a violation disguised as tenderness. Alianor flinched back sharply, her head thudding against the stone. His hand hovered for a moment, then dropped, but his eyes held hers, dark and utterly insistent, promising both salvation and damnation. My offer stands, he continued, his tone shifting back to brisk authority, though the underlying intensity vibrated in the air. More pertinent than ever, marriage, Alianor, a union that secures Hawksmere's future under my strong hand, provides you the comfort, security, and respect befitting your birth, and removes these degrading burdens. His gaze swept pointedly over Bess's frail form and the humble chamber with undisguised contempt. Imagine it. No more grinding herbs in servants' quarters. No more fear of the dark woods or the whispers of creditors. No more scraping survival from a dying estate. You would want for nothing material. Your position would be assured. He painted a picture of gilded ease, a sanctuary from the storm. But Alianor saw only the bars of a gilded cage, comfort bought with her freedom, her autonomy, her very soul. Security under the thumb of the man who likely orchestrated Aemon Thorn's exile, who saw people like Bess as inconvenient chattel, who viewed Hawksmere as a prize, not a home. The memory of Aemon's gray eyes, hostile but startlingly, brutally honest, flashed in her mind, a stark, vital contrast to Roland's polished, suffocating manipulation. The woods, with their honest dangers, felt less terrifying than the velvet-lined trap he offered. Hawksmere is not mine to bargain with, Sir Roland, she said, her voice tight with suppressed fury and fear. Lord Edmund is still... Lord Edmund, Roland interrupted smoothly, his voice like oil over ice, is in no state to refuse my counsel or my protection. He understands necessity. He sees the wisdom in securing his family's legacy, however diminished it may be, under my stewardship. He leaned infinitesimally closer, his voice dropping again, conspiratorial. Think beyond sentiment, Alianor. Think of survival. Think of power. By my side, you would command respect throughout the peak, not wither in genteel ruin within these decaying walls. Your beauty, your lineage, combined with my strength, we could build something enduring. He made it sound like a partnership, but his eyes promised only dominion. He straightened, adjusting the cuff of his leather glove. "I have pressing business at de Mowbray," he announced, his tone regaining its formal distance, though the possessive glint remained. "But I will return before Michaelmas." He let the deadline hang, heavy and ominous. "Barely a fortnight. I expect your answer then, Lady Alianor." He held her gaze, the unspoken threat thicker than the scent of feverfew in the room. Refusal meant ruin, isolation, and the full weight of his displeasure. Do not let misplaced loyalty to a dying past or foolish pride condemn Hawksmere and yourself to oblivion. With a curt nod that was neither bow nor dismissal, merely an acknowledgement of his own unquestioned authority, he turned and strode from the chamber. His heavy, confident footsteps echoed down the passage, fading slowly, leaving a void filled only with dread. Alianor sagged against the cold stone wall, the mortar clutched forgotten in her white-knuckled hand. Her legs trembled violently, threatening to buckle. The encounter had left her feeling violated, cornered, and soiled, as if his presence had tainted the very air. Michaelmas, a sword hanging over her head, an ultimatum disguised as salvation. She pushed herself upright, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her gaze fell on Bess. The maid's eyes were open, wide with fear and a dawning, horrified understanding of the threat Roland represented. She'd heard enough. "Milady!" she rasped, the word thick with anxiety. "Hush, Bess," Alianor said, her own voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Don't fret. Just rest. Gather your strength." She busied herself mechanically tidying the few items on the small table, the mortar, the bowl, wiping imaginary dust. Roland's words echoed in the sudden quiet. No more fear of the dark woods, but the woods, for all their primal danger and the Thorn's hostility, suddenly felt less terrifying, less false, than the gilded cage Roland offered with his smooth lies. Eamon Thorn's anger was honest, elemental. Roland's courtesy was a honed blade, disguised as silk. She needed air that wasn't tainted by his clove-scented presence. She needed something beyond these suffocating walls and the impending doom of Michaelmas. Her gaze fell on the small stool beside her own pallet. The unfinished embroidery lay there, the black silk threads a tangled, mocking mess, a symbol of her trapped, disordered life, the futility of the role she was supposed to play. An idea sparked, reckless and desperate, born of defiance, in the haunting memory of intricate lines on rain-slicked bark. The carvings on the oak tree, in the hollow. Eamon's silent, mysterious language. Could she speak it? Could she leave a mark? A question? Thank you. Even if he'd thrown the herbs at her feet like scraps to a dog? A refusal to be cowed? The thought was pure madness. Returning to the hollow, risking Roland's spies, Sister Marjorie's pious vigilance, facing the Thorn's wrath again. But the memory of those carvings, the undeniable glimpse of something complex and hidden beneath the harsh exterior, pulled at her with an almost physical force. It was a thread, thin and perilous, but a thread leading out of the suffocating web Roland was weaving around her, a connection to something raw and real. Later, when Bess had finally drifted into a fitful, wheezing sleep, Alianor acted. Moving silently, she retrieved a small, sharp sewing awl from her workbasket, a tool meant for piercing tough leather and canvas, not wood. It felt cold and alien in her hand, a weapon of creation rather than destruction. She wrapped it securely in a scrap of linen and tucked it deep into the pocket sewn inside her skirt. She also carefully slipped the small, worn volume of Ovid's Metamorphoses from its hiding place beneath her pallet and nestled it inside her cloak against her ribs. A talisman, a reminder of transformation, a fragile bridge, perhaps, to the man who carved secrets into trees. The persistent drizzle had softened to a clinging mist by the time she slipped like a shadow through the postern gate. The journey to the hollow felt different this time. The fear was still there, a cold serpent coiling in her belly, at every snapped twig or distant bird cry, but it was overlaid with a thrumming current of purpose, of defiance. She wasn't just begging for life-saving herbs anymore. She was embarking on a secret dialogue, a silent rebellion etched in wood. She was answering the challenge in those gray eyes, the silent dismissal. She found the great carved oak easily, a looming sentinel guarding the path deeper into the hollow. The intricate symbols seemed to shimmer faintly in the damp, diffused light filtering through the canopy, more alive than ever. Taking a deep, steadying breath that did little to calm her pounding heart, Alianor scanned the clearing. It was deserted. No smoke rose from the charcoal clamp. No rhythmic thumping echoed through the trees. Only the dripping forest watched, silent and expectant. The air hummed with a watchful stillness. Kneeling on the mossy, damp ground, ignoring the icy chill seeping instantly through the thick wool of her skirts, Alianor pulled out the awl. Her hands shook visibly. She was a noble woman whose hands knew the delicate dance of needle and silk, the measured strokes of a quill, not the forceful gouge of wood. What symbol could she possibly leave that he would understand? What could convey gratitude for herbs given in anger, acknowledge the danger he represented, and express the dangerous, consuming curiosity he sparked within her? Her gaze fell on the ovid volume she'd placed carefully on a dry patch of moss beside her. Transformation, change, escape. She traced the worn leather cover, feeling the familiar grooves. Then, thinking of the small, crude bird she'd once carved onto a hidden beam in her chamber at Hawksmere years ago, a secret symbol of her own caged spirit, yearning for flight, she knew. It was simple, universal, a plea and a declaration. Choosing a relatively smooth patch of bark below his intricate swirls and sharp angles, away from the main body of his work, but still clearly visible to anyone approaching the tree, Alianor pressed the sharp tip of the awl into the wood. It was far harder than she'd imagined. The bark resisted, tough and fibrous, then gave with a soft, protesting crunch. She leaned her weight into it, working slowly, painstakingly, etching a simple, stylized outline. A small bird, wings spread wide in flight, body angled upwards. It was crude, almost childlike compared to Aemon's masterful flowing lines. Her lines were shaky, the curves uneven, the wings asymmetrical, but it held meaning for her. Thank you for the herbs, for Bess's breath, and I see you. I see the otherness. As she finished the last wingtip, leaning back to survey her crude handiwork, a sound froze the blood in her veins, not the gentle drip of water from the leaves, not the call of a distant bird, a soft, deliberate crack of a twig, somewhere in the dense undergrowth of ferns and holly to her left. Close, too close. Panic, pure and instinctive, surged through her. She scrambled back, clutching the awl like a pathetic dagger, her back pressing hard against the massive, unyielding trunk of the oak, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped thing. Her eyes darted frantically, scanning the shifting shadows, the curtain of dripping foliage. Had she been followed from Hawksmere, Marjorie's pious spy, one of Roland's watchful men? Or Aemon himself, silently witnessing her trespass on his silent, sacred domain? The thought of his gray eyes watching her fumbling attempt was mortifying and terrifying. The undergrowth remained still. No figure emerged, but the feeling of being watched, assessed, intensified, crawling over her skin. Flight was the only sane option. She shoved the awl back into her pocket, snatched up the ovid, and stumbled to her feet, mud sucking at her boots. She plunged back towards the path, not daring to look back. The image of her crude bird, carving burning in her mind, a beacon of fragile hope, or a foolish glaring signal of her presence to unseen, dangerous eyes. The journey back to Hawksmere was a blur of cold fear and colder mist, every rustle in the undergrowth a pursuer, every shadow a threat. She slipped into the postern gate, heart hammering against her throat, half expecting a shout, an accusation, strong hands grabbing her. But the courtyard was quiet, deserted. only the ever-present drizzle soaking the worn cobbles and the mournful drip from the eaves. She made it back to her chamber unseen, the heavy door closing behind her with a soft thud that felt like sanctuary. Bess slept on, her breathing slightly less ragged. Leaning against the closed door, gasping for breath, the cold damp of her cloak seeping into her bones, Alianor felt the solid weight of the Ovid in her hand. She needed solace. She needed the escape of words, the world beyond stone walls and gilded cages and watchful woods. Moving to the weak fire, she sank onto the stool, opening the book with trembling fingers. The familiar, slightly musty scent of the pages was a comfort. Her fingers traced the Latin lines, seeking the story of Philomela, transformed into a nightingale. Her beautiful voice her only freedom after unspeakable violation and silencing. The parallels to her own trapped existence, the violation Roland threatened not just to her body, but to her spirit, were chillingly apt. Mutata faram, changed I shall bear. Alianor whispered the line, the Latin a shield against the present. A sharp, distinct tap, tap, tap at the shuttered window made her jump violently, the book almost slipping from her grasp. Not the wind rattling the frame, not rain. A deliberate sound, like a small pebble, striking the wood. Her breath hitched, followed. The thought was icy. Had her unseen watcher tracked her back? Slowly, dread coiling like a cold snake in her stomach, she set the Ovid down and crossed the small space. Her hand hovered over the latch. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she lifted it and pushed the heavy shutter open, just a crack, peering out into the rain-slicked darkness of the courtyard below. No one stood in the shadows cast by the keep's walls. She scanned the deeper gloom near the stables, the well, the kitchen door. Nothing stirred. Then, her gaze, drawn downwards, dropped to the narrow stone ledge outside the window, barely wider than her hand. Nestled against the damp stone, sheltered slightly by the overhanging thatch, lay a small, pale object. Not a pebble. It was a piece of wood, smoothed by handling and weather to a silken feel, no larger than her palm, and carved into its pale, fine-grained surface, with astonishing skill, depth, and unsettling intimacy, was not a bird. It was a face, her face, captured in the pale wood, with breathtaking precision, were the subtle curve of her cheekbone, the determined line of her jaw, the delicate arch of her brow, even the faint tension at the corner of her lips, the expression she'd worn when she met his gaze in the clearing, a mix of fear and defiance. It wasn't idealized beauty. It was intense, starkly real, seen in a way no one had ever seen her. The eyes, deeply carved, held a complexity that mirrored her own turmoil, fear, resolve, a flicker of the intelligence she tried to hide. He had been watching her carve the bird. He'd seen her panic, her flight, and he'd answered her crude, hopeful symbol with this profound, dangerous, silent communion, a gift far more potent and perilous than herbs. It was a mirror held up in the darkness, revealing a strength she hadn't recognized in herself. And it was a transgression that breached the walls of Hawksmere itself. A choked gasp escaped Alianor. The Ovid slipped from her nerveless fingers, thudding softly onto the rush-strewn floor. She snatched the carving from the ledge, her fingers closing around the cool, smooth wood, as if it were red, hot iron. She slammed the shutter closed with a force that rattled the frame, throwing the latch with trembling fingers. Pressing her back against the cold, rough wall beside the window, her heart pounded like a frantic drum against her ribs, echoing in the sudden silence. She stared at the face in her hand, her face, rendered by the outlaw's hand, with startling, terrifying perception. Outside, muffled by the thick shutters, came the distinct, rhythmic clatter of hooves on the courtyard cobbles. Departing, arriving, Roland's men, or simply a late rider? It didn't matter. The message was clear. The Thorn had found her, He had seen her, he had seen into her, and he had answered. The silent dialogue had begun, and there was no turning back. Inside the chamber, only Alianor's ragged breathing and the soft, wet rasp from Bess's palate broke the heavy silence. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, a relentless counterpoint to the storm now raging within her. The carved face in her hand felt less like wood and more like fate.
Well, my darlings, have you ever tasted such a scandalous feast? A knight offering silken shackles, an outlaw answering with a carving more intimate than a kiss, and a lady caught trembling between two prisons, one gilded, one carved in bark. Hawksmere is no mere keep. It is a stage where every glance is a blade, every silence a vow, and every gift a danger. And now, with Michaelmas looming and the Thorn watching from the shadows, the game grows darker, the stakes higher, the gossip far juicier. Remember this, my loves, scandal is not always shouted from the rooftops. Sometimes it is whispered in the hollow, scratched into oak, or left upon a windowsill. And here, in these scandalous hours, the tale has only just begun.